2 weeks ago, I was 2 weeks away from getting married. It was crazy to think that in such a short amount of time, I would be standing at the altar, promising forever to the woman I thought I knew. But then she asked me to do something that threw me off completely. She asked me to go to therapy with her. Now, I'm not the type of person who's big on therapy. I've always been pretty open, and I thought we were pretty good at communicating. We were about to get married, after all. Isn't that what marriage is supposed to be about? Honest conversations? Being able to talk about anything and everything? But apparently I was missing something. My fiancée had already been seeing a therapist on her own for a while, and she wanted me to join her for a session before the wedding. She said it was important, something about having a completely honest conversations before we took the leap into marriage. To me, that sounded a little off. If we were getting married in just 2 weeks, didn't that mean we were already being honest with each other? We were practically tying the knot. What could possibly be so secretive that it required a therapy session? The thing is, she'd always been pretty protective about her therapy. She never talked about it much. Whenever I asked how it was going, she'd just say it was helping and leave it at that. She'd never introduced me to her therapist. So, to suddenly be invited to join her for one of those sessions felt, well, strange. But, love makes you do weird things. And I wanted to support her. So I agreed to go. I didn't expect it to be a huge deal, just a chat, right? We'd talk, maybe clear up some things, and move forward with the wedding. The day of the session arrived. She was already there when I got there. I was a little early, so I sat in the waiting room. It felt awkward, like I was waiting for some sort of interrogation. It was only supposed to be a casual conversation, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. 20 minutes later, the therapist finally called me in. She greeted me with a handshake, and we exchanged a few pleasantries. Nothing too strange, just small talk. The usual, how are you, and it's nice to meet you. It was all pretty standard. But then she said something that immediately put me on edge. She looked at me, then glanced at my fiancé and said, "You're not at all like what I was expecting." Not at all what fiancé's name described. I didn't know what to make of that. Was she trying to compliment me? I wasn't sure. It wasn't exactly a normal thing to say. But before I could process that, the therapist looked at my fiancé and said, "This may be harder than we thought." And just like that, my stomach dropped. I kept my face neutral, probably a little too neutral. I didn't want to overreact, but inside, I was freaking out. What did she mean by that? Was this therapy session going to be a total disaster? The therapist started talking, giving us a little speech about how the world was changing and how relationships were evolving. I half listened, not sure where this was heading. But then she said something that completely threw me for a loop. She started talking about how my fiancé wanted our marriage to be different from traditional marriages. She didn't use those exact words, but that was the gist of it. I was nodding, still trying to process, but at the same time, I had no idea what she meant. What kind of non-traditional marriage was she talking about? I remember thinking, okay, she probably wants to talk about work-life balance or how she doesn't want to lose her independence once we're married. I thought maybe she wanted to talk about feminism or some kind of modern relationship stuff, like how she wouldn't just be a wife, but a woman with her own career and goals. That made sense to me. It's 2018, right? But then the therapist kept going. It turned out that what she was actually saying was, well, completely different. She explained that my fiancé wanted us to have an open marriage once we were married. And by open, I don't mean that we'd both be free to explore relationships with other people in a mutual, respectful way. No, what she was talking about was my fiancé wanting to sleep with other men. But I wasn't allowed the same freedom. She didn't want me with other women. No, she said she'd be too heartbroken if she found out I was attracted to someone else. The thought of me being with someone else, she said, would destroy her. I let her finish talking. I was in shock. I didn't know how to respond. I felt like I had been sucker punched. My fiancé was sitting next to me, holding my hand as the therapist continued to speak about our future and how I should let her live because that's what she needed to feel free. But all I could think was, what the hell? An open marriage? Sleeping with other people? That's not a marriage, that's a circus. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love her. I always have. But this was too much. It felt like she was asking for something that was completely against everything I thought we stood for. I thought we had a strong connection, that we shared the same values. I thought we were in this together. But now? Now I wasn't so sure. I stayed calm, even though I was pretty sure my face was red with embarrassment. I didn't know if I should scream, cry, or just get up and leave. But I didn't do any of that. I just kept my cool, probably too cool for what I was actually feeling. I could tell they were getting more confident as they spoke. They were starting to believe their own nonsense. Finally, I couldn't hold it in anymore. I turned to the therapist, asked her if she was actually licensed. Her face shifted. She didn't expect me to ask that, I guess. But she answered quickly, saying, "Yes, I'm licensed." That's when I decided it was over. I didn't care anymore. I wasn't going to sit here and let them try to manipulate me into accepting something I couldn't live with. I told her, then explained to my fiancé why we won't be getting married, and why we won't continue being a couple. I'm done. I stood up, gave my fiancé a look, something I still can't fully describe, and walked out of that office. As I drove away, I felt a mix of relief and anger. I had no idea what to do next. I had just walked out of my future. But honestly, it felt like I had no other choice. The worst part was that I couldn't shake the thought. What if she had cheated on me? Looking back, there were things that didn't make sense. I couldn't ignore the possibility anymore. But I couldn't focus on that now. The fact that she even thought this was a good idea, it was just mind-blowing. When I got home, I listened to the recording I'd made during the session. I had been recording everything on my phone, just in case. I know some people might think that was paranoid, but honestly, I was doing it out of self-preservation. I had no idea where this was going, but I knew I needed to protect myself. Listening to the recording again, I couldn't believe the things they said. How could she think this was okay? How could she want this for us? It made no sense. I canceled everything, our wedding, the house loan, everything. I severed all ties. There was no going back. But here's the thing, now people are starting to ask questions. My family, friends, they all want answers. I don't want to give them any. What am I supposed to say? That my fiancé wanted to sleep with other men, but I wasn't allowed to do the same? How do you explain that? How do you make people understand that? And more importantly, how do I stop this from becoming some kind of he said she said drama? My ex has been blowing up my phone, my brother's phone, my best friend's phone. She keeps telling everyone we can work on it that she didn't mean it, that it was all the therapist's idea, and that she was just confused. But I'm not buying it. Her final plea to me was that she had exposed her insecurities during therapy. Apparently, she was struggling with our sexual history. She said I had more partners than she did, and the therapist suggested we level the playing field, as if that's supposed to make sense. I'm done. I don't care about the details anymore. I'm not looking back. The marriage is off, the relationship is off, and I'm moving forward without her. There's no going back. And now, I just have to figure out how to handle the fallout. Let me start by saying, I really didn't think I'd be writing another update so soon, but here we are. The situation is, well, it's far from clear-cut, and things keep shifting in ways I didn't expect. So, let's pick up where I left off. First off, I want to clear something up about the journal. I don't think it's fake. Everything about it just screams genuine, and it's consistent with what I know about her. Everything. I really don't think this journal is some kind of manipulation tool, at least not in the way people might be thinking. It's just complicated. A year ago when she started writing it, I'm pretty sure she didn't intend for it to be some psychological weapon or anything like that. I mean, that's just not who she is. But as she told me, her new therapist suggested that she share it with me as part of her journey to heal and figure out what's going on in her head. That was after they recommended she open up more, especially with me, because apparently I've been a little distant, which, let's be real, I have been. I get it. I've been holding a lot back, and for good reason, but I also know it's not fair to keep pushing her away when I clearly care so much. Now, as for how I'm handling the questions people have been asking about why the wedding is off, well, it's been awkward, to say the least. People are curious, and I really don't have a good answer. I mean, we had a huge falling out, but we also couldn't find a way to fix it. There was just this massive difference of opinion between us that, no matter how much we tried, we couldn't get past. And here's the kicker. Her sister, who's really close to their mom, is probably going to figure out the truth soon enough, and when she does, it's going to be everywhere. Everyone will know, and honestly, that's something we were both trying to avoid. Her family doesn't know the full reason behind everything. They don't even know about the therapy or how much influence the therapist had on things. But the more I think about it, the more I realize that keeping it a secret isn't doing anyone any good, least of all Mela. Her family wants us to meet again next week. They're insistent, and at first I thought I could just ignore it. But after everything that's happened, I know they want to talk, to fix things, and they really want me to be there. So I've been thinking, maybe I should go. Maybe we can talk things through. I don't know, I'm torn. Part of me wants to be done with it all, but another part, deep down, still wants to make things work. I think the biggest reason I'm still stuck in this emotional loop is because, even though she's not well right now, I can still see the woman I fell in love with underneath all this chaos. And I really believe, like everyone else around me seems to think, that she can get better. I want to believe that. If I didn't, I wouldn't even bother showing up for these meetings or dealing with her family's requests. Hell, if I didn't care, I wouldn't have written this post or shared anything about what's been going on. The people close to me, including my family, can see it too. They say they can tell I still love her, and I can't deny it. It's true. But honestly, if I didn't care about her, I wouldn't even be this dramatic, as they put it. There's been a lot of theatrical stuff happening lately, but at the end of the day, it's all about figuring out what to do next. So, about that journal, what do I do with it? I still have it, but I've returned it once already. And I've been thinking about that decision a lot. I sent it back to her, in a very clinical way, just a simple letter explaining why I didn't read it. It wasn't some emotional outburst or a bitter move. I just felt like if she wanted me to have it, she should have been upfront about it. It felt like she was trying to offload the responsibility onto me, as if giving me the journal somehow absolved her of her role in everything. So I gave it back. I don't know if that was the right move, but it's what I did. Later that day, Mela showed up at my workplace. She didn't cause a scene, thank God, but she was there waiting in the lobby, just sitting quietly. She had planned to wait until I finished my day and then talk. I could tell it wasn't just a casual chat either. She had something important to say. I could have sent her away, just ignored her, but I knew I wasn't ready to do that. So I went out and talked to her, and honestly, I'm glad I did. What she had to say was eye-opening. Over the course of the next few hours, she started breaking down everything that went wrong, everything that led us here. We started with the big stuff, the things we both knew were issues, but there was a lot of nuance to it. Stress. This one I already knew about, but hearing her talk about it in detail really hit me. She'd been dealing with insane pressure at work, and she'd been handling it all alone, without even telling me. I always knew she was stressed, but it was hard to see how deep it had gone. She'd started seeing a therapist to help with it, but she never opened up to me about any of it. And looking back, I can't believe I missed it. She didn't want to show weakness, and in the end, she buried it so deep that it affected everything. The miscarriage. This was a bombshell. I had no idea. She never told me she was pregnant. A few weeks before everything fell apart, she'd found out she was expecting, but then she miscarried. She didn't want to tell me because she was afraid I'd blame her or see her as unworthy of being a mother. She thought I'd judge her, and honestly, I still can't fully process how much pain she was in, how alone she must have felt through all of it. This was a huge turning point in our relationship, and I wish I'd known. If I had, maybe I could have supported her better. Friends and influence. This one was harder for me to swallow. She'd been spending time with a friend in an open marriage, and I knew it was a bit unusual, but I never thought much of it. Turns out, this friend had been unloading her marital frustrations onto Mela, and it started making Mela question everything about our relationship. This woman's husband had pushed for an open marriage, and now she was miserable. She told Mela that I'd probably be the same way, that I'd eventually want to bring other people into our relationship, just like her husband did. It planted a seed of doubt in Mela's mind, and it really made things worse between us. I hate that this person's toxicity affected us, but I also get it. I can see how it happened now. Family dynamics. This one hurt. Her family was always the picture of perfection, her parents, especially. I never knew that her dad had been unfaithful until Mela told me. Apparently, her parents had been going through a rough patch for a while, but they kept it hidden from everyone. Her mom was still trying to keep up appearances, so I had no idea. And the more Mela talked about it, the more I realized how much we'd both been living in a bubble of idealism. Our parents weren't perfect. They were just human, and that realization hit Mela hard. It made her question everything she thought she knew about relationships. After all of this, things got even more complicated. The therapist, whom I had my own issues with, seemed to push Mela towards this idea that the only way to fix things between us was for Mela to even the playing field by sleeping with other men. That was a huge shock to both of us. The therapist thought this would somehow correct my alleged cheating tendencies and make our relationship stronger. It was such a mess. Mela was convinced for a while that this was the answer. But the more we talked, the more we both realized how ridiculous that idea was. I can't even begin to explain how hurtful that suggestion was. It's like the therapist was trying to destroy everything. But I reacted quickly. I couldn't let that happen. I didn't want to let anyone, especially not a therapist, dictate the course of our relationship. At the end of the week, I had to leave for work, and I was gone for a month. Originally, it was supposed to be a 2-week trip, but, well, work had other plans. The time away gave me the space I needed to think. I handed Mela a recording of one of our therapy sessions before I left, and I think it really shook her. She'd been living in a different version of reality, one that had been influenced heavily by the therapist, and I think hearing the recording made her see things more clearly. I spent the next few weeks pretty much on my own, with minimal interference from anyone. It was exactly what I needed. No one was pressuring me, and I got to just breathe for a bit. But after 3 weeks, Mela came to visit. We had stayed in contact during my time away, mostly talking about us and trying to make sense of everything. We decided to go ahead and take that trip to France we had been planning before everything fell apart. We figured, what's the point of waiting? The trip was great. France is everything everyone says it is. It was like hitting a reset button on our lives. We went there as friends, and when we came back, we were still us. But we were different. We had a lot of work ahead of us, but we were committed. We agreed on a lot of things, like her finding a new job to reduce the stress, and we both decided that some of our friends were toxic influences that we needed to distance ourselves from. We talked about the future a lot during that trip. We've both been hurt, but we're both still trying. We've agreed on small things like getting a puppy and a kitten together, and Mela will continue seeing her therapist. When we do get married again, it's going to be just the two of us with our closest family, no big fanfare, just something that feels right for us. And as for the future, we're planning another trip to Italy. It's not going to be perfect, but we're going to try. No promises, no fairy tales. Just two people figuring it out as we go. As the weeks passed, things between Mela and me slowly began to stabilize. We weren't fixed yet, but the cracks in our relationship felt more like scars, wounds that had healed with time and effort. We'd started rebuilding the trust that had been shattered, and the uncertainty that once clouded our future was slowly clearing up. Still, there was one shadow hanging over everything: the influence of her therapist, the one who had almost torn us apart. Her advice had been so destructive, so twisted in hindsight, and for a while it felt like the therapist was winning. She had embedded herself in our lives like a parasite, feeding off the confusion and vulnerability that Mela and I both had. But I could see it now. This wasn't just a person offering advice. This was someone who thrived on the chaos they created, someone whose own life was clearly crumbling underneath the weight of their warped ideologies. Months later, we learned something that made everything come full circle. Mela's sister, who had been quietly observing all of this, did some digging into the therapist's past. Turns out, this woman wasn't as qualified as we thought. In fact, her personal life was a mess, full of the very kinds of dysfunction she had been prescribing to Mela. Her marriage had crumbled under the same advice she had been doling out. Her own husband had left her, and she was now embroiled in a bitter custody battle over her children. All of the things she had been teaching us, about opening up relationships, about pushing boundaries in destructive ways, were a reflection of her own inability to maintain any kind of balance or stability in her personal life. The revelation came at a time when Mela and I were just beginning to see the light at the end of the tunnel. But now that we knew the truth, it felt like another layer of deception had been peeled back. Mela was devastated by the betrayal. She felt used, like a pawn in this therapist's twisted game. What hurt the most was the realization that the woman we had trusted so much had been projecting her own failings onto us. The final blow came when we learned that the therapist had been trying to spread her toxic ideas to other couples in the same way she had with us. It wasn't just us. She'd been manipulating everyone who walked into her office. But her world was falling apart. Her own clients were starting to see through the cracks in her advice, and one by one, they started leaving. The therapist had begun to unravel in public, showing up at work more and more disheveled, barely holding it together. Mela and I decided to take a stand, telling everyone we knew about the therapist's manipulative tactics. It wasn't easy, but it felt necessary. We couldn't let this woman continue to destroy lives. The more we exposed about her background and the damage she had done, the more we realized just how deep the deception had gone. Eventually, the therapist's license was revoked. There was no great public spectacle, no dramatic ending like you'd see in movies, but the woman's downfall was slow, painful, and inevitable. The people she had used as her experiments, like Mela and me, had begun to speak out, revealing the hurt she'd caused, and it caught up with her. In the end, she lost everything: her practice, her clients, and her reputation. And, as ironic as it may sound, I couldn't bring myself to feel satisfied by her fall from grace. There was no triumph in it. No sense of, I told you so. It was just sad. Sad because, in some strange way, I could see that she had once been someone who had genuinely wanted to help people, someone who thought her ideas could fix the problems she couldn't solve in her own life. But somewhere along the way, she'd lost her way, and that loss had affected so many others. Mela and I continued to rebuild our lives. Her healing wasn't immediate, but with time, we both grew stronger. Our bond deepened, as did our understanding of what it means to love and trust someone, flaws and all. But we couldn't forget the damage done. I couldn't forget the way the therapist had almost destroyed everything we'd worked so hard for. In the end, the therapist was left alone with her choices. The people who had once believed in her had walked away, and she had no one left to turn to. It wasn't a punishment that came from us. It was a consequence of her own actions. Her fall was tragic, not because she was evil or malicious at her core, but because she had allowed her own insecurities and mistakes to dictate the lives of others. Sometimes, that's the hardest part of life, the realization that people who hurt you often hurt themselves in the end. You don't need to take revenge. Life has a way of taking care of that on its own. Mela and I moved forward, no longer burdened by the shadows of the past. But I often think back to that woman, the one who tried to control us, to manipulate us, to tell us how to love. I hope that one day she finds the help she needs. Maybe then she'll realize that fixing her own life and making peace with her own mistakes was the real solution she should have been offering all along. The therapist's story was a sad one, a tragic reminder that sometimes the worst enemies we face are the ones who are supposed to help us. But for Mela and me, the future was ours to build. Thank you for watching this video. Don't forget to subscribe and hit notification bell to stay updated.